Biblical critics say that Mark and the other gospel writers knew very little about Palestinian geography. In fact, they made some very grave geographical gaffes. Had the gospel writers known their stuff, they wouldn't have made such blatant mistakes. Therefore, we can't trust them as reliable historical documents. For Matthew's gospel, this is especially problematic. A real Judean local like Matthew wouldn't borrow from somebody as geographically incompetent as Mark. Some critics have concluded from this that whoever wrote Matthew, it certainly couldn't be Matthew the Apostle. Here I want to look at 3 times the gospel writers supposedly flunk at Palestinian geography and see if these objections carry any real weight. For starters, is there a blunder in Mark 7:31? Here's the text. It reads, "When he, Jesus, returned from the region of Tyre and went through Sidon to the Sea of Galilee in the region of the Decapolis." Looking at a map, Jesus goes north to travel south. That is a bit weird. In his commentary on Mark, critic Hugh Anderson says that Jesus' course would be like traveling from Cornwall to London by way of Manchester. And biblical critic Dennis Nynum agrees, writing in his commentary on Mark. From his reading of the verse, he concludes that the evangelist was not directly acquainted with Palestine. Oof. However, I think that critics are jumping to conclusions here. Looking at the context, Mark does show that he knows the geography. Just check out Mark 7:24-26. It reads, "From there he arose and went away to the region of Tyre and Sidon. And he entered a house and did not want anyone to know, yet he couldn't be hidden. But immediately a woman whose little daughter had an unclean spirit heard of him and came and fell down at his feet. Now the woman was a Gentile, a Syrophoenician by birth. She begged him to cast the demon out of her daughter." So Mark knows where Tyre, Syrian Phoenicia, the Sea of Galilee, and where the Decapolis were. Are we really going to assume he didn't know where Sidon is? I have to say that's a pretty uncharitable reading. Instead of looking at this flat map and assuming that Mark is clueless, let's see what happens when we look at a topographical map. You can see Mount Meron, which stands 4,000 feet high between Tyre and the Sea of Galilee. According to philosopher Tim McGrew, who is a walking human encyclopedia regarding all things related to historical apologetics, he says that there is a pass from Sidon through the mountains to the Jordan River Valley, where foot travelers to Galilee could have fresh water for the journey. Now remember, there were no convenience stores that they could stop at and grab a bottle of water or a Gatorade. That's strike one for the critics. Maybe they should check a good map next time. Next up, let's take a look at Mark 11:1. Here's the verse. It reads, "Now when they drew near to Jerusalem, to Bethphage and Bethany, at the Mount of Olives, Jesus sent 2 of his disciples." Biblical critic Randall Helms pounces on this. He says, "Anyone approaching Jerusalem from Jericho would come first to Bethany and then Bethphage, not the reverse." This is one of several passages showing that Mark knew little about Palestine. We must assume, Dennis Nynum argues, that Mark did not know the relative positions of where these 2 villages were on the Jericho road. Oof. But hold on a second. Read Mark 11:1 again. Notice that the verse doesn't say that when they drew near to Jerusalem, they came first to Bethphage, then to Bethany. Mark only tells his readers roughly where it was on the road that Jesus sent 2 of his disciples ahead. The towns of Bethphage and Bethany were both on the eastern slopes of the Mount of Olives, just half of a mile from each other. This is just reading with a hermeneutic of suspicion. A good commonsensical reading of the text reveals that there is no fault. That's strike 2 for the critics. But let's give them another shot. Is there a geographical goof in Luke 17:11? Let's take a look at the verse. It reads, "On the way to Jerusalem, he was passing along between Samaria and Galilee." Samaria rests between Galilee and Judea, so why would Jesus walk near the border between Samaria and Galilee to go to Jerusalem? In his commentary on Luke, the late Joseph Fitzmyer says, "This phrase enshrines Luke's geographical ineptitude, and it's not easy to explain what is meant here." Big oof yet again. According to Fitzmyer, Luke is geographically inept. But let's take a look at a map of 1st century Palestine before we jump the gun and assume that Luke didn't know what he was talking about. If there's any ineptitude going on here, it's not on Luke's part. Rather, it's Fitzmyer's ineptitude of considering the historical background. You see, during the 1st century, Jewish and Samaritan religious leaders taught that it was sinful to have contact with the opposite group. Neither was one to go into each other's regions. The Jewish historian Josephus reports numerous violent confrontations between Jews and Samaritans through the first half of the century. According to Josephus, the Samaritans would even kill travelers going to Jerusalem. And Luke 9:51-52 confirms these hostilities. Luke writes, "When the days drew near for him to be taken up, he, Jesus, set his face to go to Jerusalem, and he sent messengers ahead of him who went and entered a village of the Samaritans to make preparations for him. But the people did not receive him because his face was set towards Jerusalem." So going east and traveling near drinking water and staying away from these hostilities makes a ton of sense for Jesus. This passage just really isn't that mysterious at all. Luke's description makes perfectly good sense. That's strike 3 for the critics. Now, at this point you might say, well, wait a second, you're dodging one of the toughest ones. What about the madman of Gadara? The synoptic writers report that Jesus cast out a multitude of demons into a herd of pigs who ran into the Sea of Galilee and drowned. This story is in Matthew 8:28 through 34, Mark 5:1 through 20, and Luke 8:26 through 29. Mark and Luke say that this odd event unfolded in the country of the Gerasenes, but Matthew says that it was in the land of the Gadarenes. Right off the bat, there's a contradiction. But it gets even worse. Gadara is 5 miles away from the Sea of Galilee. The city of Gerasa is 30 miles away from the coast. Critics have concluded that Mark was ignorant and Matthew tried to fix it but still messed it up. But there are diverse, meaningful textual variants in the Greek text of Mark 5:1 and the parallel passages of Matthew 8:28 and Luke 8:26 through 27. In Mark and Luke, the best attested reading is Gerasenes, an attempt to represent the adjective corresponding to the place name. Without the vowels Gerasa, GRS, or KRS is how the place name would be written in Aramaic. Scholar Mark D. Roberts points out in his book, Can We Trust the Gospels, that these variants tell us that perhaps we should call the demoniac the madman of Cursa instead. Cursa, or modern-day El Kursi, is on the east side of the sea, and there happens to be a steep slope that ends less than 50 yards from the Sea of Galilee. Just take a look. Scholars Paul Rhodes-Eddy and Greg Boyd point out in their book, Jesus Legend, that archaeologists have located cave tombs within 2 miles of the site. There's also a 5th century chapel there, suggesting that the early church regarded it as spiritually significant. But what about the phrase Gadarenes? Well, it is feasible that some early scribe of Matthew's Gospel either misspelled the term Gerasenes or mistook it for Gadarenes. Just like somebody might confuse or mistakenly correct Waterloo for Westerlo. Both are cities in New York State. Copyists of manuscripts are not immune to making spelling mistakes or to correcting what they are copying if they think that it's a spelling error. We have repeatedly seen that skeptics have overstated their case against the reliability of the Gospels pertaining to geography. There's actually a very strong case that the Gospel writers knew Palestinian geography, which I talk about in this video. If you want to learn more, give it a click. Thanks so much for watching, and be sure to like and subscribe.